You're listening to Health Coach Conversations, a podcast where our conversations help health coaches all around the world to level up our businesses and to get more clients. Hello and welcome. I'm Kathy, founder of the Health Coach Group, and today I am interviewing Bob Ulander, MD, received his medical degree from the UCLA School of Medicine, where he was inducted into the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. Since completing residency training in emergency medicine, he was dedicated over 30 years to the practice of emergency, palliative, and end-of-life care. Dr. Bob co-founded Empowered Endings, a unique model of palliative and end-of-life care with his wife, Elizabeth, to address the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual needs of patients and families facing complex and terminal illnesses. You can find them at www.empoweredendings.com. So I'm here today with Dr. Bob Uslander, and we are talking about his book, Empowered Endings, right?
Nope, don't have a book.
No,
we have a book that's in the works called Permission to Choose.
Well, we'll just give you some incentive to get it moving.
There you go. But it's not called Empowered. The book is called Permission to Choose.
Permission.
And it's out in the being reviewed by publishers.
So you're advocating for permission to choose end of life, right?
Correct.
And then that would also be not be just end of life, but then how they would end their life? Or
yeah, we're advocating for better care for people who are in the final chapters of life. We're advocating for dignity through every chapter, and especially through the final stages.
Okay, what legal end of life options are there now?
Well, in 10 states plus DC, Washington, D.C., there is medical aid in dying is legal, which is the death with dignity that has been around in Oregon for 25 years. So people who are terminally ill and competent to make decisions can go through this legal process to get medication to, end their lives gently and at the time and place of their choosing. And, the other option that's generally legal most anywhere for a competent person is be said voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So
that's what that's what the priest told my grandma she could do.
Yeah. And it's, it's considered legal because it's not considered suicide. A person who's competent can choose to stop eating and drinking anytime. It's not recommended or wise to do it without appropriate support and guidance, but, and that's part of what we can chat about.
Is that a hard way to die?
Not when it's done well.
Really?
It's not typically hard. It doesn't happen as quickly as most people would prefer because it usually takes a week to 10 days for the body to completely shut down. Mm-hmm. But when you have appropriate support and guidance and comfort measures, it's usually very gentle.
You said that there were some states. Do you know which states allow for medication?
States that allow medical aid in dying are Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, Colorado, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey, Hawaii, and then Washington, D.C. And there's legislation in a number of other states currently.
Really?
There's pending, and there's referendums that are likely to be put on the ballot, and so it's definitely a conversation that's happening in a number of other states as well. The majority of the population is in favor of death with dignity and people having choice. It's just a matter of the lawmakers and the religious factions that make it challenging for these laws to pass.
You have to go through a lot of red tape to be able to do that, or is it a simple process?
Kind of depends on who's supporting you. If you find the right support, then it can be very streamlined and in some places relatively quick. Different states have different regulations in terms of the time frame. A number of states, they all have a similar basic requirements, which is most states require you to be a resident of that state. There are two exceptions. Vermont and Oregon no longer require a person to be a resident of that state. You need to be an adult, so 18 years or older. You need to have a terminal condition with a life expectancy of less than 6 months. And you need to be competent to make informed medical decisions.
So somebody with Alzheimer's, there's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, people with Alzheimer's and dementia, they often retain decision-making capacity for a period of time. But at the time when they have decision-making capacity, they typically don't have a life expectancy of less than 6 months, unless they have some other condition in addition. By the time that dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias get to the point where the life expectancy is less than 6 months, they no longer have the ability to make informed medical decisions. So they're typically excluded from being able to participate in this.
Can they make plans at a time?
They can make plans for people to help kind of gently guide them out, but not through this process. Okay. Because this process requires that at the time that the person is seeking the support, they need to have decision-making capacity. So no one can do this for another person, the medical aid in dying piece. So the other requirements, the other sort of the logistics, the individual who's seeking support, who's the terminally ill person, needs to make a face-to-face request to the attending physician. And in some states, the waiting period between those two requests is 15 days. I think there's one state where it might even be 21 days. In California, the waiting period is 48 hours. It used to be 15 days. And then a few years after the law went into effect, an amendment was passed that reduced the waiting period from 15 days to 48 hours because many patients who initiated the process couldn't complete the process because they declined during that 15-day waiting period. So now the attending physician can see the patient and receive those requests after 48 hours. The patient needs to make a request to a second independent physician who's called the consulting physician. And that request can happen prior to, in between, or after the request to the attending physician.
Is that a specialty in a physician's? I mean,
it's not. It's not. Any licensed physician, any licensed MD or DO, and in New Mexico, nurse practitioners as well can do this. So there's no specialized training required. However, it's highly recommended that if someone's going to go through this process, that they work with people who know what to do and how to do it well and how to avoid the pitfalls and things that can sometimes create struggle and often create trauma for the family members and for the patient. Now, there's a whole host of I've been doing this in California, helping people in California since the law went into effect 8 years ago, and I've seen all kinds of situations where people initiated the process and then found out that the doctor who they had initiated it with wasn't able or willing to continue. They didn't know how to support them. There were just glitches that would come up. The patients and families would be sort of left to their own to take the medication without support, which can be very traumatic for the families. So there's best practices and standards of care that have been established by organizations and by individual physicians and groups. And it's highly recommended that anybody who's going to support patients and families through this process spend the time, do their due diligence, and make sure that they have all the information and resources that would make the experience optimal for the patients and families. Because it doesn't have to be traumatic. It's challenging and it's stressful and it's sad and all of those things. But at the end of the day, the person's dying. They want to be able to die in a way that's more aligned with who they are and consistent with the way they lived. And it can be done in a way that's gentle and smooth and dignified. But if it's not supported properly lots of different things could go wrong and create a more of a dramatic, catastrophic type situation, and that can be avoided. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do, which is to increase awareness, educate people about the options, about the process, and make sure that they find the resources and the support that will help them optimally.
Yeah, I kind of got ahead of myself here, but we can go backwards here and say, can you share your professional journey, what motivated you and shaped your model?
Sure. So I was an emergency physician for 25 years. And during that time, I took care of lots of people who were dying or lots of people who were at the end of their life. I resuscitated, tried to, bring back to life a lot of people who should have really been allowed to just die peacefully, but they didn't have the right paperwork or their families weren't prepared for that and the conversations hadn't happened. So a lot of the deaths in the emergency room and in the hospital are traumatic and it's difficult. It's hard for everybody when those things happen. It's really, and the patient is usually not aware of what's happening in that state, but sometimes they come back and they're admitted to the intensive care unit and they go through another few hours or a few days of kind of poking and prodding and then often die anyway or live in a very compromised state for a while. So the idea of just letting people go in a dignified way throughout most of my emergency medicine career didn't exist. And it was like do everything, keep people alive, don't let them die on my watch. And that was, it creates a fair amount of moral injury to the people doing that type of care. And it's also very traumatic and hard for the families and the loved ones who live on. So I had a lot of sort of exposure to that model. About 10 years into my practice, I had a good friend die of melanoma at the age of 32. And I got to experience supporting him and his family and bringing in the local hospice team and creating these really beautiful experiences over the last several weeks of his life. And then helping him in the final hours to have a very peaceful, gentle departure. And that really changed my perspective. And it showed me a different way and it planted this seed. And I kind of carried that forward in my practice, and I started practicing differently. I started being more aware of the nuances and being more supportive of and helping families make decisions that were challenging but appropriate. And
Mhm.
and it was like, but I had to buck the system a bit to not take a 92-year-old man who had hit his head and had an intracranial hemorrhage and do the natural thing, the kind of the knee jerk reflex of either admitting him to the hospital, transferring him to another facility, trying to do everything to keep this man alive, knowing that he was either going to die or be severely impaired in a nursing home, all those things. But helping the family make decisions that would be more aligned with what that person would want. And a lot of time, it's the conversation really focused on what would your dad want
Mhm.
in this scenario? Like if he was standing here looking at himself in this state, what would he tell you to do on his, to do? How would he ask you to advocate for him? When you do that, it gives people this permission. It's not the decision that they're making. They're making a decision based on what they know of their loved one and how they would want things to unfold. So I started doing more of that, and over time, I just kept spending more time with the older patients and just honoring them, and I just wanted to kind of be in their presence. I would sit with them and learn their stories, and I transitioned out of emergency medicine because I really wanted to be able to develop relationships, and I wanted to be able to do something that had more impact and more meaning to me and that I could grow into something more substantial. I had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit that came from my father and kept building. And so I moved to San Diego in 2011. And in 2013, I just had an epiphany. I was sitting on the bluff looking out at the ocean in San Diego, and I just had this like clear download. And I heard and kind of felt as well the words, "You're here to help people die better." And I didn't quite know what to do with that because I wasn't like a hospice doctor. I wasn't in that field. And the next day, I happened to meet a nurse who was in the hospice world, and she introduced me to some of the people that she was working with and for. And within a few months, I was like working in palliative care and hospice and helping to build a program. And I spent 2 years in that traditional model, in the traditional healthcare model. And at the end of that, I I had gotten so frustrated with the system and really fed up with all the limitations and constraints that kept people from having what they really needed. And a lot of that was supporting the families in a way that the system doesn't support. And both my parents became terminally ill and went through their own end of life journeys. And then after my father died, felt like this is the time. It's time to do something meaningful and different and take a chance. And so I started my own practice, and that was in 2016. And it's just been a beautiful journey of inviting people who were aligned. My wife Elizabeth initially joined the practice as a social worker, and then she started running the practice, and then together we have built this beautiful collective of the medical practice, an educational institute, a nonprofit foundation, all with the same vision of helping people experience a more gentle, dignified, empowered end of life journey. And that includes providing the medical care and support and counseling for the patients and families, as well as providing education, training, inspiration, and building community through our educational institute, and then providing financial support and bereavement support through our foundation. So it's just been like this beautiful unfolding that has happened, and it makes sense. Everybody who comes to us, or everyone who hears about it, gets it. This makes sense. We don't do end of life well. And I just had lunch with an ER doctor who's really interested, because he's a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses and people in the ICU and in different parts of healthcare are experiencing their own moral injury around this issue that has kind of largely been ignored for many, many years.
Do you very often see where the kids don't want to let the parents go and the parents are saying, "Let me go. It's time"?
That happens often. So an important part of our model is to provide the support for the families. We have end of life doulas that work with us, and social workers and counselors, and we really focus on the experience of the loved ones, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are left behind. The patient dies, and in many cases, they get the support they need to have a gentle, to get their pains managed and their symptoms managed. It's the families that often are just frustrated and overwhelmed and angry about what's happening or what's not happening.
Feel guilty.
So there's the emotional issues related to their relationship with their loved one. There's the frustration that the doctors aren't showing up, and the system isn't showing up, and the cost of everything. So there's all these issues, and so we really focus heavily on the experience of the families, because it doesn't have to be traumatic. It actually can be gentle, and we help them understand why their loved one, why their parent is wanting to go, is feeling the way they are. Sometimes they get it, sometimes it's still hard. But when we can help the children sort of shift their perspective and see things through the eyes of their parent, of their dying loved one, and kind of come around to a place of being able to support them in 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 having a soft landing, we like to call it, that's transformational.
Mhm.
So we see this happen in a number of cases where this transformation happens and the loved ones go from feeling, like horrible about what's happening and angry and like wishing things were different, to honoring and being in this place of reverence and recognizing what a gift it is to be able to provide that love and support and not fighting against their loved one to do what is in their best interest and what they really want.
I have kids who are scientists that we tell them, that my husband and I, that when it's time, we want to go. And they're saying, oh, but it's right around the corner, the cure for anything.
Well, and that you can hope the way that we like to look at it is you hope for the best and you plan for everything else. So we do a lot of planning. We talk with people. People approach us all the time and they want to talk about and plan for their end. And we love that. We love people being proactive, and it gets us very excited to help people put an appropriate plan in place where they explore what they want, what they don't want. They identify who it is that's going to speak for them when they can no longer, speak for themselves. And we facilitate conversations between the person and their loved ones, so everybody understands and is able to express their either their concerns or their doubts, ask questions, and ultimately get to a place of support. So that and then it gets documented. It gets kept in a digital space. The patients can create a video to share from their own words and their own voice what they want and don't want, and then they get a QR code. They get a card with a QR code so that anybody can access that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We went through a resuscitation class the other day, and it says a lot of times they can't let them go because if they don't have the paperwork right there, there's nothing you can do. You got to bring them back.
Yeah, you've heard about people who want to have DNR tattooed on their chest, so nobody does that.
They said that won't work.
So what we'll have people who go through this, who do this process with us, do this planning with us. We'll have either a bracelet or a pendant or a card that has the QR code, so they can immediately look at it and see the documentation, the pulse form that indicates that they don't want to be resuscitated. And there's so many nuances. The planning that we do is really deep. It's not just CPR, no CPR. If I am if I'm permanently disabled and death is imminent, don't do anything. There's a series of things that people don't really think about, but need to. What happens if you develop dementia and you can't speak for yourself? How do you want the care to be delivered? Where do you want to be? There's just a whole, and my experience of being an ER doc, being in palliative care, hospice, it allows us to have a very robust experience in this planning, because we know all the things that people should be considering. And the typical advanced healthcare directives that you might get from an attorney or just you download from the internet, they don't address those things. And it's such a gift to somebody's loved ones to have all of that information there, so that when those situations arise, they know that what they're doing is consistent with their loved ones' wishes, and families don't have to bicker about what they would want or not want. So it's really a gift for people to do this process and then have it so that they can just kind of put it on the shelf and hopefully not worry about it for years or decades.
That's so it's kind of like journaling your plans so that you can discern it, right? Is that
it's like journaling it with a guide, right? It's guided journaling and then creating a document that is a legally recognized document that is accessible if needed in the time that it's needed.
In all of your background that you have, what are some gaps that you've identified in the healthcare system?
Well, that's a great question, and we talk about gaps a lot. So I appreciate that you're bringing that in. The gaps that I really that we're working on filling, to educating people about and filling, are really the gaps specific to end of life care. And I think that's one of the areas that's sort of one of the last frontiers in healthcare. Everybody assumes that when somebody is terminally ill and they go on hospice care, that it's all everything, they get everything they need. And even doctors and people in healthcare assume that hospice is complete and it provides all this support and that people will need. And unfortunately, that's not the case. There are wonderful hospices. There are not wonderful hospices. There are phenomenal people working in hospice. And then there are people who are overwhelmed and burned out and inexperienced. So it's the whole gamut of things. And the gaps that we've identified, there's 7 primary gaps. One of them is that when people go on hospice, often they will never see a doctor again. They've been cared for by teams and specialists and primary doctors. And when somebody refers them to hospice, the vast majority of time, there is no doctor involved in their care from that point forward. It's all done by nurses and nurse practitioners, wonderful people, well-meaning people, but they're not doctors. And people at this time of life, when things are dynamic and stressful and scary, greatly benefit from having a doctor engaged with them. They don't have anybody like walking up with them. When people go on hospice, they get a nurse that will come out and visit, often like once a week, sometimes if needed more, but they come in, they're there for a half hour, 45 minutes. They do their charting, they check the medications, they check in with the patient, and then they go. The social workers come once a month, the chaplains or spiritual counselors come once a month. They do get an aide that usually will come and bathe them or support them a couple times a week. But other than that, the family is responsible for providing all the care. And there isn't a consistent sort of presence to walk with them and navigate them down this path, which is why we bring end-of-life doulas into the mix. And we work with most of our patients, have developed a relationship with one of our end-of-life doulas who can be available by text, phone to come to visit them and really kind of walk the walk so that they have this constant support. The third gap is that there's no one really taking care of the family. The families are usually left to their own to figure things out, to figure out, how to find the additional support, to figure out how to give the medications so families are often left on their own. We focus heavily on the families because they're the ones who need the support. And they're the ones who are going to be living for years or decades. And we want their life to not be marred by these experiences. People aren't given options. They don't learn about end-of-life options. They don't learn about medical aid in dying. They don't learn about voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. They are, hospice in general is sort of, their philosophy is they don't prolong life or hasten death. They just provide support along the way. People want options. They want to know what their options are, and they want to be able to choose, have agency and choose what's going to happen when they can.
My biggest fear would be pain. And I remember my mother-in-law went into hospice, and I didn't feel like, we couldn't even go see her. My husband could, but it was 2020.
Yeah, so in the middle of pandemic and
that was hard.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like they relieved her pain enough. And I think it's because they don't want to interfere. Is that right? They don't.
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's very dependent on the individual nurses and where they are. Sometimes they're not aggressive enough, and people end up being in pain. They don't want to be responsible for overdosing them. Or sometimes they're over aggressive, and when they just kind of keep giving them more and more medications, and when the patient is no longer conscious, and sometimes they get it right. It's not easy. I'm not hospice bashing. I love the concept of hospice. I have a lot of friends who work in the hospice space. I have a lot of respect for people in hospice. It's the system. The system doesn't support it. It's an insurance product. They have inherent limitations and constraints, and it's also becoming a big business. And there's a lot of hospices coming into the market that are run by that are funded by investors and venture capitalists, and so there's a lot of focus on the bottom line, which means that they're going to limit staffing, and so there's a lot of inherent problems. I just want people to be aware that these issues exist, these gaps exist, so they can go into it with their eyes open and try to find the additional support that would help to fill the gaps and keep them from being traumatized. The other gaps, we'll kind of just wrap that up. The other gaps are people are not usually given access to life enhancing therapies, quality of life enhancing therapies, physical therapy, nutrition support, massage, acupuncture, music. There's a lot of things that people will benefit from that can improve their quality of life as they're on this journey. And then there's just not a lot of collaboration in general. And there's in the healthcare system, and especially hospices try to, they think that they're going to take care of everything. And they don't realize that there are other people who could provide support. So there's a lot of siloing going on, and there isn't adequate collaboration among the whole, the teams. So we try to be extremely collaborative and include everybody who's part of the team, who's part of that person's journey to toward to create a village. And we have a village concept that we try to bring to the patients and families.
Yeah, that was one of the bad things in 2020 was everybody wanted to be there with her. I mean, she had a lot of grandkids and they couldn't go. They wouldn't let them in.
Yeah, and that just added additional stress to every aspect of healthcare. I mean, the whole every aspect of life. And I think it came to bear, especially in healthcare, people in nursing homes, isolated. They couldn't see their loved ones. Maybe they could visit across a window, or it was extremely challenging. I'm very happy that I wasn't an ER doctor during that time, because I know that was the ERs were also extremely stressful and challenged.
Yeah, that's a hard time. Okay. Can you share challenges in discussing sensitive topics with patients and families and solutions, or have we kind of gone over that with the kids that don't agree?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most important thing is for people to feel heard, to approach it in a way that's non-judgmental, that is open to receiving what it is that they're experiencing, trying as hard as possible to put yourself in their shoes and understand their perspective. For me, one of the greatest gifts that I received during this transition that I was in from ER doctor to palliative care end of life physician was my parents becoming ill and dying. And I wish that I had them with me, but I gained so much from the experience of supporting them through their end of life journey, seeing the challenges that came up and the gaps firsthand. Even for a palliative care doctor taking care of his own family, I encountered these really challenging limitations and gaps. So seeing it, experiencing it on the other side, from the other perspective, was really valuable for me. So I have that perspective, and I know what it's like to be the son or the loved one of somebody who's in that space, and I use that to get a better understanding of what the people are experiencing.
Is the support that families receive from the healthcare system adequate?
No. No, it's not. And if you think about it, there is no mechanism for families to get support. Doctors don't, they can't, there's no way for physicians to bill for the time that they spend talking to loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always like an additional responsibility. And often it, happens at the end of a day where they try to make calls, return calls that came in, but there isn't, the families are woefully, the support for families is woefully inadequate. And it results in a lot of anger and a lot of panic decisions. And it's sometimes all it takes is like giving people a phone number that they can call or text even, and get sometimes it's just like one question and a response that will prevent an unnecessary 911 call or ER visit or hospitalization. So I think so focusing on the families and this and their needs and guiding them is one of the big focuses of our practice.
That's good. My mom's 89, and I know from taking her to the emergency room a few times and to different doctors that, it's hard to see the way that some medical people treat older people. And it's hard being a child, with a parent in that kind of situation. So having
And it doesn't help to get angry. I mean, you
you
get
get in trouble if
frustrated,
you get angry. I
yeah,
can tell
and
you.
it's like people in the hospital or in the ER, if they vocalize their frustration, if they try to bring attention to the lack of appropriate care and attention, then they're troublemakers, and it will have a negative impact on them. So they're really in a horrible position because things are not happening the way that they're supposed to, and they're suffering because of it. And yet saying anything and asking, so there isn't enough advocacy. There isn't enough recognition of that. And there are shining stars out there. There's no question. There are people who are extremely compassionate, empathic, understanding, and sometimes even
They're
because of the
overworked.
system, they just get, like the empathy becomes dampened. The moral injury and the lack of appreciation from the system and and the hospice work, people in hospice, the documentation requirements are so significant. The number of patients that they need to see is so significant. And all these factors kind of zap their enthusiasm and challenges their ability to be really present for people.
Okay, so I'm always talking about health coaches and how they should be working with doctors. You're a death doula, and how unique is the doctor and doula partnership?
It's pretty, in my experience, it's very unique. Doulas are just sort of coming into sort of the limelight, not limelight, but the
It's a sacred position, right?
it really is, and it's interesting because some of the people who were doulas, birth doulas, when the birth doula movement came around, or subsequently, are now transitioning into end of life doulas, and it just makes sense. These are people who have a specialized experience and specialized knowledge base, and then they go through some training, and they want to give of themselves. They want to be supportive at this time, at this sacred time of life. And we recognize the value of doulas, and we are really strongly promoting doctor doula partnerships, and we are teaching and building community among the doula world. A lot of the doulas are nurses that have been working in hospice or in different capacities for a number of years, and now want to give of themselves differently. They're social workers, they're chaplains, they're doctors. There's a lot of different ways to come to this doulaship and to partner with the existing healthcare system. I think we'll see more and more doulas providing support and being more legitimized and credible over time. And we're going to hopefully be a big part of that.
So, what kind of background should you have? I mean, you'll be mentored to become a doula, right?
They have there's doula trainings that are out there. We're starting to provide training for doulas through the Empowered Endings Institute. And then you need to get mentored in the experience. A lot of people are going through doula trainings, but they don't have any experience, and so they're not really prepared to be of service yet. So there needs to be ways for them to get that experience under the mentorship or tutelage of people who are experienced. Another one of the sort of our goals, part of our vision, is to create these doula partnerships and mentorships as well. So with the end of life doulas are, there's a number of them out there now. They're having a hard time finding a way to integrate themselves into the system, And hopefully that will all kind of start to coalesce here soon.
Okay, so if somebody wants to become a doula or needs the services of a doula, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, I think what I'd like people to explore our website. There's a lot of other ways to. There's a ton of information. We're building a resource library. We're opening up our community so that people can come on and they can download our ebook, End of Life Options. They can learn about doulaship. They can learn about doctor-doula partnerships. They can learn about optimal end-of-life care. And again, become part of a community of people who are interested in helping to improve end-of-life care for everybody. So the website is empoweredendings.com. And again, I hear a lot of people say that they have enjoyed the time they spend on the website because it is so intuitive and there's so much information, and it's only going to get better and better over time. And I credit my lovely wife, Elizabeth, and our team for really building this incredible site that has so much valuable information. And we would love to hear from anybody who is interested in exploring further, whether it's for getting our services to help support them through their end-of-life journey or learning how to become a member of the Empowered Endings community.
Okay, and we'll give access to your website below the podcast, along with a link for your free ebook.
Sounds great. And hopefully that will all come to you soon from my team.
Yes.
All right, Kathy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes.